Imagine standing on the shores of ancient America, not as a European explorer, but as a mariner from Africa, gazing at the lush, untamed lands across the vast Atlantic Ocean. What if everything you thought you knew about how black people first came to the Americas was only half the story? What if they arrived here not as captives, but as navigators, traders, and contributors to thriving civilizations, long before Columbus set sail? Welcome to our deep dive into one of history's most fascinating and overlooked chapters. Who were the black people in America before Columbus? Today, we're unraveling the untold story of early African presence in the Americas, a story that challenges the narratives we've been taught for centuries. Now, let's embark on this incredible journey. History, as it's often taught, tells us that Africans arrived in the Americas only as enslaved people during the transatlantic slave trade, forced to endure unimaginable suffering. This version of history, while undeniably true in its tragedy, is also incomplete. A growing body of evidence, historical, archaeological, linguistic, and even genetic, suggests that black people were present in the Americas thousands of years before Christopher Columbus set foot in the New World. The idea that ancient African navigators, traders, and settlers reached the Americas long before European explorers challenges deeply ingrained historical narratives. It raises new questions about the cultural exchanges that shaped early American civilizations and demands a re-examination of the complexity of human migration. The presence of black people in pre-Columbian America is not merely a matter of speculation. It is supported by a variety of historical records, archaeological finds, and cultural clues that point to transatlantic contact long before Columbus. Ancient African mariners are believed to have crossed the Atlantic, establishing contacts with indigenous American societies. These early voyages were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader tradition of African exploration and trade, an interconnected world that modern textbooks often overlook. By examining this evidence, we gain a deeper understanding of the cultural diversity and resilience of human societies, long before European conquest reshaped the world. One of the most significant pieces of evidence supporting the presence of black people in the Americas before Columbus is the advanced seafaring capabilities of ancient African civilizations. Long before European maritime exploration, African cultures had developed sophisticated shipbuilding techniques and navigational knowledge that enabled them to undertake long-distance voyages across the ocean. The ancient Egyptians, Carthaginians, and Malians stand out among African civilizations that are believed to have had the capacity for transatlantic travel. Let's start with the Egyptians. The maritime achievements of ancient Egyptians are well documented. Egyptian reliefs and murals depict large seafaring vessels capable of long voyages, navigating not just the Nile, but also the open seas. Inscriptions from the time of Pharaoh Necho to around 600 BC describe an African circumnavigation of the African continent, suggesting that Egyptian and Nubian mariners were already exploring distant regions. Some scholars believe that these explorers may have reached the Americas, bringing their knowledge, culture, and possibly even trade goods with them. In addition to the Egyptians, the Carthaginians, descendants of the legendary Phoenicians, were renowned for their exceptional navigational skills. They established extensive trade networks that spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. Some tantalizing clues, like Carthaginian coins and artifacts found in parts of South America, suggest that they may have ventured as far as the Americas. These finds, though controversial, add another layer of intrigue to the question of pre-Columbian African presence in the New World. Perhaps the most well-documented case of an African expedition to the Americas comes from the Mali Empire in the 14th century. According to historical records from Arab scholars like Al-Amari, Mali's ruler Musa al-Bukhari II is said to have launched an ambitious voyage across the Atlantic with a fleet of 2,000 ships. While mainstream history often dismisses his voyage as legend, these accounts describe Abu-Bakari's decision to abdicate his throne in pursuit of new lands across the ocean. The striking similarities between certain West African and Mesoamerican cultural elements, such as pyramid building, agricultural practices, and artistic motifs, suggest that his expedition may have reached the Americas and left a lasting impact on indigenous societies. Archaeological discoveries across the Americas provide further evidence of early African contact. One of the most compelling findings is the presence of large carved stone heads in the ancient Olmec civilization of Mesoamerica. The Olmec civilization, which flourished in what is now Mexico around 1200 BC, left behind massive stone sculptures depicting individuals with distinctively African features, broad noses, full lips, and tightly coiled hair. These sculptures have led many researchers to believe that the Olmec had interactions with African visitors or settlers. Beyond the Olmec heads, other artifacts point to early African influence in the Americas. For example, African-style cotton gourds and linguistic similarities between certain African and indigenous American languages further support this theory. Even genetic evidence provides tantalizing clues. The presence of African DNA markers in some indigenous American populations suggests intermingling between African and native peoples long before European contact. Additionally, similarities between African and American agricultural practices, such as the construction of earth mounds, indicate possible transatlantic exchanges. Both West African and Mesoamerican civilizations built large ceremonial mounds for religious and social purposes, a shared practice that hints at cultural connections that predate Columbus's arrival. Despite this compelling evidence, the history of African presence in the Americas before Columbus has been systematically suppressed. European colonial powers sought to control historical narratives to justify their conquests and to establish racial hierarchies that placed Africans and indigenous peoples at the bottom. Recognizing that Africans had been global explorers and contributors to ancient civilizations would have challenged a Eurocentric worldview that portrayed Africans as primitive and incapable of advanced achievements. During the colonial period, European historians either dismissed or actively suppressed accounts of African voyages to the Americas. Early European explorers, including Columbus himself, documented encounters with dark-skinned indigenous peoples in the Caribbean and South America. Yet these accounts were largely ignored or reinterpreted to fit colonial narratives. Spanish chroniclers like Bartolomé de las Casas noted that some native peoples described encounters with African traders, but these records were not given serious consideration by mainstream historians. The transatlantic slave trade also played a significant role in erasing African contributions to American history. The forced migration of millions of Africans to the Americas created a narrative that framed Africans solely as enslaved laborers, stripped of their agency in history, rather than celebrated as explorers, traders, and contributors to early American civilizations. This narrative continues to shape mainstream historical perspectives to this day. The story of Black people in America long before Columbus is one of exploration, cultural exchange, and resilience. From the advanced seafaring capabilities of ancient African civilizations to the archaeological and linguistic evidence of African influence in the Americas, the case for pre-Columbian African contact is strong. Yet the systematic suppression of this history has left many unaware of these early connections. By reclaiming and acknowledging this hidden history, we gain a more accurate understanding of the complexity of human migration and cultural interaction. The story of Black people in the Americas before Columbus is not just an alternative historical perspective. It is an essential part of the global human story, one that deserves recognition, exploration, and a place in our collective memory. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you found this exploration as captivating as we did, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video.